Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for our presentation of our final project for our graduate course, Research in Communication Disorders. My name is Rachel Hetman, and I conducted this project alongside my fellow cohort members, Amanda Guida, Juliana Gore, and Taylor Hafer. Our project is titled Predictors of Persistent Childhood Stuttering. What we were looking to discover was why some children, quote unquote, grow out of their stutters while others do not. For those of you who are unfamiliar with stuttering, it is a disorder that affects the fluency of one's speech in many ways, and it can have a lifelong impact. Some people live their entire lives with the stutter, while for others, it's just a short period of time. There are ways to predict this, though. Our goal is to share with you the number of predictors that we have found for persistent childhood stuttering, along with the few non-predictors, because there are some of those as well. It is important to remember, though, that predictors aren't definite. And with that being said, we are going to continue by introducing the methodology behind our research project.
So we used 4 databases to obtain our research articles. Many of them are health related. We searched the word stutter paired with the listed words, and this gave us a wide range of articles that served our purpose and helped us to cover all the possible predictors. We chose 8 articles that we felt were most relevant and ultimately decided to include 7 of them. So many studies we consulted had similar participants. Preschool and school-age children were the majority, but our study on genetics included adults as well, up to age 55. Group sizes were fairly small. The mean participant number was 72. Participant sizes for our studies were between 30 and 145. All participants were native English speakers, and multiple studies included more boys than girls. This makes sense because stuttering is more common in boys, and our studies included members of both low and middle socioeconomic statuses. Longitudinal research designs were a common theme because the studies followed participants for long enough for some of them to recover from stuttering.
Presumed predictors that were researched included age of stuttering onset, time with disorder, genetics, emotional implications, sex, severity of disfluencies, and secondary characteristics, to name a few. We researched the outcomes of persisting stutterers versus recovered stutterers. Persisting stutterers were classified as individuals who have had the disorder for greater than 36 months, while recovering stutterers were classified as those who have stuttered for less than 36 months. Researchers also compared these groups to typically developing children and adults as well. Results of the research found many of our predictors influenced the persistence of stuttering. On the contrary, some areas that were studied in the research that were concluded to not be predictors of stuttering are normal disfluencies, such as tripping over words when speaking. For example, uttering the sounds and saying like often when communicating or presenting in front of an audience. An area to not consider a predictor is secondary physical characteristics. This includes head and facial movements made during a disfluent utterance. Lastly, a child's vocabulary diversity is not considered to be a reliable predictor of stuttering according to our studies.
So while analyzing our research, we did find some limitations. So for example, one of our studies did not provide clear demographics of our participants. They didn't give information such as socioeconomic status, geographic information, and family history. This would have been difficult for us to study persistence if we don't know exactly what the population the researchers have worked with, and we won't be able to draw clear conclusions. On top of that, we found some limitations with our evidence. So we found that most of our articles had a small sample size. Most of them were under 50. Also, most of them studied more males than females. Although this applies to the typical stuttering population, this does not apply to the general population of persistence versus recovery. We also had non-experimental samples, so the participants were either recommended by their therapists to participate or were asked to enroll because these aren't randomized experimental designs, which are studies that introduces the least amount of biases. Therefore, our research could have came from biased studies. Some interesting we found that we couldn't examine something interesting that we found is that we couldn't examine all of these factors. Most of our studies looked into one or two factors. Although one of our studies did look into 5, this inhibits us from finding what sorts of combinations can occur with our predictors. So we have no way of knowing if someone could produce atypical brain activity and a family history. This is something that can be further researched in our field. Another interesting thing that we've ran into is that we can only establish correlational versus causal relationships. So we're able to find that there were links between the two things, but we couldn't 100% say having a family history and persistence causes persistence. We could only say that these two things are related to each other. Something to go with that we went over earlier is that recovery and persistence are not definite diagnoses. So in our studies, the participants were split up into 2 groups, and it was based on the amount of time that they have this disorder. It's not guaranteed that they have recovered or persisted. So someone who has been placed into a group who is persisting and who is placed in a group that is recovering doesn't necessarily mean they belong to that group. They were placed there, and it was predicted that they will persist, but it doesn't mean that they will persist. They could also end up recovering, and someone in the recovering group could end up persisting. This could throw off some of the results and can make them a bit skewed. And the last thing that could be further researched that could limit some of the results is the emotional impact of stuttering. This is also known as a freezing response, which was not considered. All that is someone pausing before they are speaking, and that could have something to do with the negative emotions they were feeling before an utterance. So moving on to clinical implications, it is essential for SLPs, teachers, parents, and other healthcare professionals to be aware of possible stuttering predictors that can help prevent or lessen the severity of the stuttering and to seek speech therapy services if appropriate. SLPs could also focus on the emotional impact of stuttering, so helping the student learn how to work around the disorder and create more positive feelings rather than negative feelings, which are likely to trigger stuttering occurrences. It is also important to consider all the predictors we have compiled from our research and to understand that there's no sole predictor, meaning that there could be multiple factors present. And with every case, with all predictors to consider, treatment and therapy approaches should be unique in every case. So for a couple example profiles we have gathered from the research is that one child would repeat frequently during presentations. This is considered to be a normal disfluency and not a stuttering case. Another example from the research is a child who is recovering from stuttering and had been tripping over their words for a period of a few months. With speech services, this child has displayed swift improvements. And lastly, our third example profile is a child who has persistent stuttering and has a family history of the fluency disorder and sadly feels uncomfortable speaking to others. He has been struggling since he was in preschool and is now in the 2nd grade. This is an example of a child who has multiple factors that are considered to be likely persistence of stuttering.
Thank you again for joining us for our final presentation. We appreciate your attention. If you would like to know more about our research, I encourage you to explore our references listed on our project. Also, we will be around for the next few minutes to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.